My name is Aaron William Moore. I'm a modern historian of China and Japan, but I also work in modern literature. Welcome to my exp. The best reason to turn our attention to civilians when studying World War II is that, quite frankly, they're the ones who are most like ourselves. So if we want to understand the experience of war or the potential of what war would mean to us, it's probably not a good idea to read military planners, political leaders, or famous intellectuals. Many of these people were not directly experiencing the impacts of, for example, bombing. And I think we have a natural curiosity about what would happen if we were dragged into a devastating war with a foreign power and were subjected to enemy attacks. Modern warfare can't be waged without mass support. So any power, whether it was Britain or Japan or China or the Soviet Union or Germany, required the support of civilians in order to gain victory in the battlefield. There was a lot of writing at the time that indicated that new modern technologies would erase the difference between the front line and the home front. But even putting aside that very basic and obvious example of, for example, aerial bombardment, or even the fantasies around superweapons, the fact of the matter is that modern warfare depended on the productive capacities of modern societies. The famous generals were not building the artillery shells. Ordinary people were. So we have to understand why they were committed, how they got committed, and why they persisted even under bombardment to make the war machine work. How was it that people on opposite sides of a war could never connect the dots that supporting the war machine encourages the enemy to target you? And how is it that these people were never able to force their leaders to stop fighting? In doing the research on attacks on civilians from the air during World War II, I came across a lot of very powerful stories from the time, and it was difficult. When you do very deep archival and comparative research, it can be a real challenge to pull it together as a kind of coherent narrative. But there were certain things that kept coming up over and over again that I thought were important for modern readers to understand. And one of them was that the war years were, to put it very bluntly, miserable. You didn't have treats. You couldn't go on holiday. Your parents or children could be separated from you. The cinemas could close. The pubs could close. You couldn't get across the city because the transport systems were disrupted. And the overwhelming sense that you get from the diary accounts in particular, but even the memoirs, is this grinding kind of misery. For example, one teenage girl was writing in her diary about her father going to the sink to wash his hands. And this is in Britain in 1940, in the deepest period of the aerial bombardment by the German Air Force. And as he's washing his hands, his wedding ring fell off and went down the drain because he had gotten so thin from lack of food that his ring wouldn't stay on his finger. And it's those kind of moments when you see just how miserable people were at that time. And when I read these accounts, or for example, so in Japan, after cities are bombarded, it was often teenagers who were sent out to clear the streets. And this didn't just mean pieces of rubble and plaster and wood, but human bodies as well. And there are many accounts where they describe finding their classmates, the bits and pieces of their bodies on the roads, and how it then forces them to think about their own mortality, their missing father who might be in the Pacific, and overall the importance of family. The Second World War is often described as the Good War. But after reading hundreds of civilian accounts, I'm not so sure what was good about it. It may have been the necessary war, and many good things came out of it, in the sense that the Nazi regime was destroyed and the Empire of Japan was destroyed. But it's hard to describe a war conducted in this way as a noble effort. And I think you find that historians are fairly divided on this topic, because those of us who emphasize the importance of the civilian accounts tend to say things like targeting civilians is never moral. It's always an immoral act. And furthermore, it didn't really seem to hasten the war's end in any significant way. Whereas I think historians who focus on military strategy documents and the statements from political leaders are more inclined to say the opposite and say, well, as troubling as it was, there were reasons why civilian targets were hit, often unintentionally, and it's part of the many factors that brought about the end of the Second World War. One of the difficulties that we encounter when studying the wartime period is this problem of the necessity of public support for the war to succeed on the one hand, and how that makes us targets of the enemy on the other. So everyone surely can agree that it is wrong to purposefully target civilians. But if civilians are necessary for the war effort, they build the planes, they produce the food, they make the railways work. The war machine in the modern era simply does not function without them. And it even goes down to very basic things like looking after children, looking after the elderly, baking the bread on a daily basis. These ordinary people are responsible, even the weakest members of society are responsible for making modern war possible. So how can you not target them to defeat your enemies? But in doing so, you then invite the enemy to target you as well. It becomes a vicious cycle of reprisal and pursuit of total victory. And this is one of the reasons why we call it a total war. It's not simply because it draws from every resource within the society. It then also makes every aspect of the society a target for enemy attack. And so in that sense, every war in the modern era becomes a suicidal war if you're a civilian. So there's from my perspective, a very disturbingly cavalier attitude towards targeting civilian populations of enemy nations. And it just shows that whatever lesson we were supposed to have gained from the Second World War through the painstaking record through diaries and memoirs and oral histories that was transmitted and retransmitted and inscribed and reinscribed and archived and put into libraries and films and so on, that message just doesn't seem to have landed with us very well. Maybe there is more time to avoid these conflicts going forward, but we currently seem very eager to re-experience the kind of civilian suffering that you can see in the Second World War.